The atmosphere in Kingsley's, one of Manhattan's most prestigious dining establishments, shifted dramatically in an instant. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Silverware paused above plates, and every patron's attention turned toward a single point in the room. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery stood trembling between the tables, his legs supported by metal braces. He extended a hesitant hand toward Diana Johnson, who worked as a server at the restaurant. The pianist had just started playing a gentle tune, and the child's spontaneous desire to dance caught everyone off guard. "Sir, please manage your child," came the sharp rebuke from Manager Thornton. "This behavior is unacceptable. We're a fine dining establishment, not an entertainment venue, and our staff members aren't here for children's amusement." Richard Montgomery, founder of Montgomery Investments and among America's wealthiest individuals, felt his throat tighten. This was Lucas's first public outing since the accident that had left his legs partially paralyzed 2 years prior, an experiment Richard now regretted. "Lucas, please sit," Richard commanded quietly but firmly. Diana stood frozen, her eyes moving between the manager, the wealthy businessman, and the boy whose outstretched hand still hung in the air. During her 5 years at Kingsley's, she'd mastered the art of blending into the background, particularly around clients of Montgomery's caliber. "Mr. Thornton, my shift has ended," Diana stated calmly, untying her apron and setting aside. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, she smiled warmly at Lucas and accepted his hand. "I really shouldn't dance while wearing my work apron." Richard rose abruptly from his seat. "What exactly are you doing?" Diana met his gaze steadily. "Accepting a kind invitation, sir." Before anyone could intervene, Lucas took his first uncertain step. His foot scraped awkwardly against the polished floor, the metal supports making a harsh sound. Yet Diana didn't attempt to correct his movements or rush him forward. She simply matched her rhythm to his. "She'll lose her position tomorrow," someone whispered from a nearby table. Richard stood motionless, suddenly overwhelmed by a memory. His late wife Elizabeth had danced with Lucas in their living room. "Perfection isn't the goal," she told him. "Connection is what matters." As Diana followed Lucas's unsteady movements, something remarkable happened in the boy's expression. Fear transformed into fierce focus. Embarrassment gave way to quiet confidence. For the first time since his accident, nobody was guiding, assisting, or correcting him. He was taking the lead. "Mr. Montgomery," the manager interrupted Richard's thoughts. "I assure you the situation will never occur again. She'll face appropriate consequences." Richard remained silent. The entire restaurant seemed suspended, waiting for his response. After all, someone with his influence could destroy any career with a single word. Staff members stopped their tasks. Other diners watched with curious anticipation. Yet all Richard could focus on was his son's genuine smile. After 3 dance steps, Diana escorted the boy back to his table. "Thank you for inviting me," she said with formal courtesy, treating him like an equal. "It was truly my honor." As she turned to leave, Richard stopped her. "Wait." His voice sounded different, almost foreign to his own ears. "What's your complete name?" "Diana Johnson, sir." Richard nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. He withdrew a business card from his jacket and extended it toward her. "My office, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. The restaurant collectively held its breath. Diana accepted the card without revealing emotion, though her hand trembled slightly. "Dad," Lucas called as she walked away. "Why did you do that?" The question lingered like an accusation. Richard looked at his son and momentarily saw not just the child Elizabeth had entrusted to him, but a complete person whose desires and needs he'd systematically overlooked for 2 years. As dinner continued in uncomfortable silence, nobody noticed Diana's expression as she departed. Not one of fear or defeat, but a quiet resolve that contrasted sharply with the turmoil building in Richard Montgomery's eyes. What secrets does Diana carry? And how will this chance encounter transform not just one life, but an entire approach to healing? The answer lies in an unexpected confrontation at the top of Montgomery Tower. Montgomery Tower's lobby gleamed with glass and marble surfaces that caught and reflected the morning sunlight. Diana immediately felt conspicuous in her best outfit, a navy skirt and white blouse purchased at a discount store. The people streaming past her wore clothing that likely cost more than her monthly expenses. "Diana Johnson here to see Mr. Montgomery," she informed the receptionist, who assessed her with a clinical eye before placing a call. "18th floor. Miss Winters will meet you there." Inside the elevator, Diana drew a steady breath, gripping her worn handbag. What she felt wasn't fear. It was a quiet resolve that came from surviving far worse circumstances. Miss Winters appeared to be in her 40s, with penetrating eyes and flawless posture. "Mr. Montgomery is currently on a conference call. Follow me, please." Walking through the mirrored corridors, Diana sensed the curious stares from employees. An African-American woman being escorted through executive offices was unusual enough to spark whispers and speculation. "He had you terminated, didn't he?" Winters asked abruptly when they were alone in a waiting area. "It happens. Influential clients make calls, and people like you lose employment." "People like me?" Diana echoed. "You understand my meaning," Winters replied, adjusting her glasses. "Employees who don't recognize boundaries." Diana smiled without humor. And where precisely should those boundaries be? Before Winters could respond, her phone chimed. "He's ready for you now." Richard Montgomery's office occupied half the floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan looked like a miniature model. The man stood gazing at the cityscape as though surveying his personal domain. "Mr. Montgomery." Diana greeted him formally. Richard turned, his face carefully neutral. "Miss Johnson, I appreciate your coming." He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." The silence that followed was calculated, a tactic Diana immediately recognized. It was designed to make anxious people fill the void with excessive talking and self-incrimination. "Do you have educational credentials?" Richard finally asked. "Excuse me?" "Education. University degrees." Diana maintained steady eye contact. "Bachelor's degree in child development from NYU. I started but didn't complete a master's in special education." Something flickered across Richard's face. "Surprise, perhaps. Yet you work serving tables?" "Actually, I work 3 positions. The restaurant, a weekend bookstore shift, and tutoring when I could secure students." Richard moved to his desk, retrieving a folder. "I conducted research on you, Miss Johnson. I wanted to understand who would." He hesitated. "Dance with my son." He opened the folder, revealing printed photographs of a community facility. "Freedom Steps. You established this 6 years ago." Diana straightened in her chair. "My sister Zoe and I co-founded it. It's a dance program for children with physical challenges." Richard examined several documents, which is now facing closure due to insufficient funding. Diana showed no surprise. Of course, he would uncover everything within 24 hours. "I didn't come here seeking financial assistance, Mr. Montgomery." "Then why did you come?" "Because you invited me." Richard laughed softly, a hollow sound. "Fair point." He stood again, restless energy evident. "I want to employ you." Diana blinked, genuinely caught off guard. "As household staff?" Richard's expression hardened. "As a therapeutic companion for Lucas." His son's name seemed difficult to pronounce. Diana noticed his eyes briefly drift toward a photograph on his desk, a smiling woman holding an infant. "I employ the finest specialists available," Richard continued. "Physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you did yesterday..." He paused as if the words were painful. "It was different. It was simply a dance, Mr. Montgomery." It was the first time I've witnessed him smile since the accident. The admission clearly cost him. "I don't want someone to dance with my son. I want someone capable of doing what you did, following his lead rather than directing him." Diana studied the man before her. Beneath his facade of authority and control, she recognized what others might miss: a desperate, struggling father. "I can compensate you 5 times your current earnings." Diana stood. "No." Richard looked genuinely shocked, someone unaccustomed to hearing that word. "I don't work for individuals who see my race or economic status before recognizing my competence," she explained calmly. "And I certainly don't work for those who attempt to purchase solutions to emotional challenges." Richard's face flushed. You're refusing an offer that would resolve your financial difficulties out of pride. Out of dignity, Diana corrected. And because your son deserves more than someone hired to pretend genuine care. She walked toward the door, then paused. Lucas doesn't need additional experts. He needs space to direct his own journey. You don't know my son. No, Diana agreed, but I understand people like him. People whose physical limitations are insignificant compared to the invisible prisons we construct around them. She retrieved a card from her handbag and placed it on his desk. Freedom Steps meets Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 o'clock. If you'd like to bring Lucas, the initial session is complimentary. As Diana departed, she passed Winters, who had obviously been listening at the door. You just refused an offer from Richard Montgomery, she whispered incredulously. Have you lost your mind? Diana smiled. Perhaps, but I'd rather be considered foolish than be anyone's possession. Richard Montgomery now faces an impossible choice. Maintain his empire control or follow his son into unknown territory. What he doesn't know is that Diana Johnson has been planning this moment for far longer than he could imagine. The following Wednesday found Diana at the community center's reception when Zoe rushed over, nervously adjusting her hijab. There's a Bentley outside, she whispered urgently, and you won't believe who's in it. Through the window, Diana spotted the luxury vehicle. Lucas sat in the back, peering anxiously outside. Richard remained in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel as though engaged in an internal struggle. He won't come inside, Zoe predicted. Men of his status don't visit places like ours. Diana smiled, recalling Lucas's expression during their brief dance. Never underestimate a determined child's influence. As they watched, the car door opened. Lucas emerged slowly, adjusting his supports. Then, surprisingly, Richard stepped out as well. The billionaire looked uncomfortable in casual trousers and a sweater, an obvious attempt at informal dress that still radiated privilege. Told you he'd come, Diana murmured. Zoe stared at her sister. What have you done? Diana didn't respond, but her eyes held a secret even her sister didn't fully know. In her small Bronx apartment, hidden beneath her bed, lay a notebook filled with observations about children like Lucas and men like Richard Montgomery. Years of research and a carefully developed plan that had begun with accepting one invitation to dance. What Richard Montgomery couldn't fathom, couldn't imagine from his world of glass towers and limitless resources, was that Diana Johnson wasn't merely a server who danced with his son. She was a woman on a mission, and his empire of isolation and privilege was about to face its greatest challenge. The simple truth that life's most valuable lessons cannot be purchased. They must be experienced. Freedom Steps operated from a converted warehouse. Handcrafted posters decorated the walls with messages like, your rhythm, your rules, and every movement matters. When Richard and Lucas entered, children with various mobility aids practiced free-form movements to upbeat music. Mr. Montgomery. Diana approached, wearing casual clothes bearing the program's logo. Welcome. Lucas watched the children with wonder. A girl in a wheelchair executed graceful spins, while a boy with a prosthetic leg created an original step sequence. This seems disorganized, Richard commented, visibly uncomfortable. There's structure, Diana replied. Just not the kind you're familiar with. She turned to Lucas. Would you like to participate? The boy nodded enthusiastically, but glanced at his father uncertainly. Go ahead, Richard said tensely. I'll stay right here. As Diana guided Lucas to the group, Zoe offered Richard a chair. The first visit is always challenging, she commented. For parents, not children. This isn't therapy, Richard argued. I've hired the best rehabilitation specialists available. And how effective has that approach been for Lucas? Zoe asked gently. The studio door opened, admitting an elderly woman with elegant gray braids, leaning on an ornate cane. Her presence commanded attention. Dr. Elaine Mercer. Zoe whispered. Neuroscientist specializing in brain plasticity. Retired from Harvard. The woman greeted several children before noticing Richard. Mr. Montgomery, you declined my research proposals 3 times over the past 2 years. Dr. Mercer, I didn't anticipate finding you here. I oversee the research component, she explained. We're studying how non-directive movement approaches affect neural reorganization in children with motor challenges. Research. Richard frowned. I thought this was simply a community dance program. Diana returned, having settled Lucas with another child. Freedom Steps is a pilot motor rehabilitation initiative based on movement autonomy theory, she explained. We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscientific principles. If you lead a research program, why work as a server? Because we lack adequate funding and because individuals like you rejected our proposals 3 times. Realization dawned. You were Dr. Mercer's assistant on those proposals. Co-author, Dr. Mercer corrected. Diana has an incomplete master's degree because she had to leave graduate school to care for her sister, but her theoretical contributions are groundbreaking. You knew who I was at the restaurant, Richard concluded. From the moment you entered, Diana confirmed, and when Lucas stood to dance, I recognized an opportunity to demonstrate rather than explain. Was the dance staged? Absolutely not. Lucas chose to stand. I chose to respond. A group of journalists entered the studio. Richard immediately tensed. What's happening? Phase 2 of the plan, Diana replied with a slight smile. Zoe showed Richard a newly published article. Revolutionary motor rehabilitation methodology shows promising results. We published our initial findings today, Dr. Mercer explained, and invited media coverage. You exploited my son for publicity. Richard's voice turned icy. Diana led him to a side room where photographs of dozens of children covered the walls, each with handwritten progress notes. On the final wall hung an empty frame. What's that? He asked. Our future. The complete rehabilitation center we could establish with proper resources. 500 children annually instead of 50. You orchestrated everything, Richard said quietly. The dance, the meeting, bringing me here on press day. I recognized an opportunity and seized it. From months ago, when you canceled our meeting without reviewing the proposal, I promised myself I'd find another way. Diana, Zoe interrupted urgently. It's Lucas. They rushed back to find Lucas at the room's center, surrounded by other children. Someone had silenced the music, and everyone watched in hushed attention. The boy had removed one brace and was attempting to balance with only one support. Lucas, Richard started forward, but Diana stopped him. Wait, she whispered. Watch. Lucas drew a deep breath, concentrating intensely. Then, to everyone's amazement, especially his father's, he took a complete step without full support. Small, unsteady, but entirely his own. The children erupted in cheers. Camera flashes illuminated the moment. Richard's normally composed face now showed raw emotion, unshed tears glistening. This is why we created Freedom Steps. Diana said softly, not for perfect steps, for first steps taken independently. Richard watched his son, seeing him not as a problem requiring management, but as a complete person discovering his own strength. This could have been accomplished without manipulating me, he said finally. It could have, if you'd answered our calls or reviewed our proposals. The reporters noticed Richard. A murmur spread as Lucas, oblivious of the tension, continued practicing his new step with pure concentration. Richard Montgomery found himself cornered. Before him lay 2 choices. Withdraw in anger, confirming his cold reputation to press, or embrace the moment his son had created. Between the power he'd always wielded and the freedom his son needed, Richard occupied unfamiliar territory, where neither money nor influence determined the next move. A man accustomed to controlling every variable now faces a decision no amount of wealth can influence. Will pride win, or will he choose a harder path of humility? Richard Montgomery faced the waiting reporters, his son having just accomplished an independent step before cameras, and Diana Johnson having skillfully orchestrated this impossible moment. Mr. Montgomery, a reporter approached. Would you comment on your presence at Freedom Steps? Is it accurate that your foundation declined funding for this program 3 times? Richard glanced at Lucas, still practicing his new movement, oblivious to the political tension. Then, surprising everyone, especially Diana, he smiled. You know what's most difficult for someone in my position? Richard addressed a reporter, but spoke loud enough for all to hear, admitting when we're wrong. Stunned silence filled the space. The Montgomery Foundation is pleased to announce complete funding for Freedom Steps for the next 5 years, including construction of a permanent rehabilitation center based on a methodology developed by Dr. Mercer and Ms. Johnson. Camera flashes exploded. Zoe gasped. With one condition, he added, watching Diana tense, that Ms. Johnson maintains complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference. 3 months later, bulldozers cleared ground for the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center. The project wasn't the most luxurious the Montgomery Foundation had funded, but it was the most innovative. Every space designed with direct input from children and families. Diana supervised construction frequently, never alone. Lucas appeared regularly, sometimes bringing other children. And to everyone's continued surprise, Richard Montgomery also appeared, quietly observing progress. I never expected you to actually attend board meetings, Diana commented one afternoon, while reviewing plans. I never expected to study neuroplasticity at 50, Richard replied, rubbing tired eyes. Before him lay a scientific article marked with numerous notes. Yet here we are. Diana studied him curiously. Is this public penance or genuine interest? Lucas requested removal of his second brace last week. I know. He told me. His previous physical therapist said that would be impossible for at least 2 years. Diana smiled. But you dismissed her, remember? Because you told me she was incorrect. Richard pointed to a photograph of Lucas balancing with only one crutch. He's progressing faster than any traditional medical prediction. Why have you never accepted my apology? Richard asked suddenly. Because you never apologized. You redirected resources, changed policies, funded our program. That's compensation, not apology. Richard nodded slowly. Fair point. At the opening ceremony 6 months later, the contrast with that restaurant evening couldn't have been greater. The expansive adaptive space filled with children using various mobility devices, all moving freely. In the main hall center, Lucas, now wearing only a lightweight brace on his left leg, led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. His movements remained limited, but flowed with confidence no doctor had predicted. Richard watched from a distance, not interfering. He no longer needs you to support him, Diana said, approaching quietly. No, Richard agreed, but he still needs me present. Crucial difference. Richard turned to face her. Thank you, he said simply. For what exactly? For teaching me to follow. A reporter approached. Mr. Montgomery, how does witnessing your son's progress feel? Richard looked at Lucas, now helping a younger girl find her balance. Proud, not of what he's overcome, but of what he's creating for others. What's been your greatest lesson from this journey? Richard Montgomery, once known solely for his financial empire, looked directly into the camera. That true leaders aren't those who guide others down paths they believe correct, but those with courage to follow when someone reveals a better way. 1 year later, the Freedom Steps program expanded to 3 additional cities. Diana received a Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, and her methodology began implementation in hospitals nationwide. Lucas, now using only a light cane on challenging days, enrolled in regular school and became a youth spokesperson for the program, inspiring other children to discover their own pace. And Richard learned the hardest, most valuable lesson. That true power doesn't lie in controlling every move, but in knowing when to step back and let others lead. The transformation extended beyond individual lives. The Montgomery Foundation restructured its entire grant process, prioritizing programs led by people with lived experience over those with only theoretical expertise. Miss Winters, the skeptical assistant, became director of community initiatives, personally reviewing proposals Richard once would have dismissed. Freedom Steps evolved into a model replicated internationally. Dr. Mercer published research demonstrating that children in autonomy-based programs showed 30% faster neural pathway development than those in traditional rehabilitation. Diana's incomplete master's thesis became required reading in pediatric rehabilitation programs. But the most profound change occurred in smaller, quieter moments. Richard began attending Lucas's sessions regularly, not as an overseer but as a participant. He joined parent support groups, where billionaires sat beside janitors, united by shared challenges and hopes for their children. One evening, as Diana locked the center after a late session, Richard arrived unexpectedly. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "A real one." Diana waited. "I was wrong. About you, about Lucas, about what strength means. I built walls around both of us, him with specialists and schedules, me with power and control. You didn't just teach Lucas to take steps. You taught me to recognize I've forgotten how." Diana smiled. Apology accepted. "There's something else." Richard handed her an envelope. Not a check, a partnership proposal. "I want to establish the Diana Johnson Chair in Adaptive Movement Studies at NYU. Full funding for you to complete your doctorate and continue this work." Diana opened the envelope, reading carefully. "With full academic freedom?" "Completely. Your research, your methodology, your vision." For the first time since their initial meeting, Diana's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes. "Do you know how long I've dreamed of this?" "I'm beginning to understand the cost of deferred dreams," Richard replied quietly. The center's door opened, and Lucas entered using only his cane. "Dad, you're here." "Diana, can we practice the new sequence?" "It's late, Lucas," Richard started, then caught himself. "But it's your choice." Lucas grinned. "Then yes." "Diana, I've been working on something. Want to see?" As Diana and Lucas moved to the practice space, Richard watched, not directing, not managing, simply present. The boy moved with increasing confidence, creating his own choreography, and Diana followed his lead with practiced ease. This was a revolution Diana had envisioned. Not one dramatic moment, but countless small ones where dignity replaced pity, autonomy replaced control, and authentic connection replaced performative charity. Years later, when researchers studied the Freedom Steps model, they noted something remarkable in their data. The most significant predictor of child progress wasn't severity of disability, family resources, or even therapeutic innovation. It was something harder to quantify: the willingness of adults to relinquish control and follow where children led. In a Manhattan restaurant called Kingsley's, a new manager now displayed a small plaque by the entrance. "Some of life's most important dances begin with a simple yes." Staff members still told stories about the night a waitress danced with child, though the details grew more legendary with each retelling. But Diana, Richard, and Lucas knew the truth. The real story wasn't about one dance or one moment. It was about what happened next, the difficult, unglamorous work of dismantling barriers, challenging assumptions, and building something better. Richard Montgomery learned that his greatest contribution wasn't his wealth, but his willingness to be transformed by those he once overlooked. Diana Johnson discovered that her most powerful tool wasn't her research, but her refusal to accept others' limitations as her own. And Lucas found that his greatest strength lay not in overcoming his disability, but in showing others how to see differently. In a world where power and privilege often remain unchanged, where those without resources stay invisible, their story reminds us that authentic transformation occurs when we cross the invisible boundaries separating us. When billionaires learn from servers, when fathers follow sons' leads, when those with everything discover they have the most to learn from those with little, that's when genuine revolution begins. Not with grand declarations or massive fortunes, but with one person having courage to take an authentic step, and another having wisdom to follow.